consortium of state directors of CTE for shorthand just came out with a paper recently, said CTE is your STEM strategy, making the case that career and technical education should not be siloed over here, but really should be fundamental to the learning experience of all students at some point, and also tying into kind of that hidden STEM economy. So I wondered if you could share your thoughts on how post-secondary programs are transitioning to meet the future needs of the workforce. And if you can share some thoughts about how CTE can motivate high school students to continue on, to persist in enough education to get the jobs that they want. I was really struck by what a job for every Pennsylvanian who wants one and a Pennsylvanian for every job we have open.
So I think that's an interesting point, and it was very interesting that you mentioned silos, because that really is our biggest challenge, particularly at the post-secondary level, is beyond just the silos that we see in the funding, the silos that we see in the disciplines. I mean, just traditional higher education, if you study one major, you might get an elective in here, but pretty much you're studying one thing. And it is in a direct conflict with what we're hearing employers, because what they're saying is, we need you to understand the whole mechanism. We want you to go across discipline. We want you to work in teams and understand you may not be that 4-year degreed engineer, but the designer needs to understand what the engineer is doing. The marketing person needs to understand. The salesperson needs to understand the product. And that's not what they're finding. So I think the biggest benefit here for us from higher education and STEM as a whole is not so much in the definition of whether it's engineering or math, but understanding that it's the literacy, it's the competency across the whole STEM spectrum that's going to help us as we work together to try to resolve some of these issues that we're seeing, not just in the future, but right now. We've got employers across industry that are telling us, we need help. Where is the pipeline? So from the higher education perspective, it's causing us to not only look within our doors and look at our own student body, but it's also causing us to look into your K-12 system. But it's interesting about the CTE. I found that interesting about the question, because it's not just career and technical education. That's such a small group of students that you have as a whole. And when we look at the numbers that industry is going to need, we can't get it out of just career and technical education. So we have to figure out a way where we can work with the districts to go beyond just those kind of occupational-minded students to say all of those students are going to need this. All of them are going to need this, because it's based on the competency that they possess, that critical thinking that we just heard. Intuitive. You need to understand how things work, even if you're not physically the one assigned to make it work. We're not seeing that. And in the traditional disciplines, we're not seeing it. And then also, I know there's a lot of discussion about the A in the STEM for the STEAM. That's critical. My perspective, from a workforce perspective, understanding the needs of that creative class is critical. And if we don't address that, we're going to be missing the boat. So our goal at CCAC is really to look at how we can begin to, one, integrate across disciplines, how I can work with not only our community computer information technology folks, but also work with someone in our cosmetology or our culinary, because that's all important. I like the story with the antidote, so I'm going to steal that too from the superintendent. But I was recently at a meeting. We were talking about career and technical education, and one of the individuals in the room was from a company, and we were talking about the kind of disconnect between what we see and hear from industry needs, and also how at the higher education level, how we align our career and our workforce programs compared to some of the areas that the students are being trained in, particularly at the CTEs. You know, we don't have the same level of demand for the program. So they can study something in the CTE. I study veterinary science because I like animals, but then you come to college and there's not really that program for you to go into, and you go further and there's not a huge demand in the job market for it. So then what do? If we can train across those disciplines, just because they like and they're in the veterinary program doesn't mean they have to stay there. They can still learn those other areas so that they do have something to fall back on, and not 4 years later when they have, you know, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 worth of debt. So we have to begin to help to frame that so that that literacy corresponds across those disciplines. But what that employer was telling us is, they said, we were talking about cosmetology, and we said, well, there's really not a demand. On the workforce side, I do absolutely no training in cosmetology. There's not that demand. And they said, well, wait a minute. They said, well, we are a chemical company, and that cosmetology student who is the colorist, they like the color. You've seen the kids. I've seen them. You know, the orange, the blue, the pink. They love that, and they come up with it, and they match it, and some of it is really creative. And she said, that's exactly the skill set that we need. She said, if you give me that student with that creativity, I can teach them the science behind what they're doing. Well, that's STEM education. So we should be training that way. And that is really an area from the higher education perspective that we've got work to do, because we're not seeing it that way. We're not saying that student can be a chemist. We're saying that student needs to do hair and be a cosmetologist. And so we do have to broaden that, and that's some work in progress. One of the things that I do think that the higher education systems are doing, and doing much better than they have in the past, is the focus on competency. At CCAC, I'm out at the West Hill Center out in Oakdale, and our training in our lab is focused on competency-based. It's not Carnegie Unit, it's not seat time. Do you have an understanding? And we do test, but you demonstrate what you do. It's not that pop quiz on Friday. It's, okay, here's the piece of equipment, so here's the theory. So we have a lab, and at the back of the lab is the classroom. So they get it from the instructor, and then they move right out of that classroom area into where the equipment is, and now they have to demonstrate it so that they can get that immediate feedback, not at the end of the semester when you realize they're failing. They can get immediate feedback, and we can say, do you have it? And then our benchmark is 85%. You don't get to 85% competency. If you can't demonstrate that, you don't go on. There's no A, B, C, D, and E. There's no 60%, because the employers are saying 60% is unacceptable. So we have to have the same standards. So aligning our standards with industry is one of the things that we're doing, I think post-secondary education is doing as we begin to transition. You know, one of the other areas that we really should be doing more, and I would invite any of the educational systems that are here that are interested, is bringing those teachers into our classroom. And I know with professional development, there's a lot of considerations around budget, but we'd be very willing to look at opportunities to seek funding to help support that, because it's very important that those students that are learning this, even in the CTE space, when they come back, if they're talking about it, if you're not familiar with what they're learning, how are you enforcing it? Because that's what we need. We need that enforcement. We need parents to understand it's not just about a four-year degree. We have so many four-year degreed students that are at CCAC right now because they come out and they cannot afford to be independent, and now they're coming back to get the skills, to get the competencies, to get the critical thinking skills. If we can give them that while they're in the system, we can do it earlier and then allow them to still make the same choice, or make a choice, but at least make it a better informed choice. So to continue, as you said, to be that educator. I don't see myself as a teacher. I'm administrative. Give me a piece of paper and I'll push it across, you know. But I am an educator, and to help move that education forward, I think really is our responsibility. And then probably the last thing I want to say about that is also engaging in that dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment. That is not used enough by these students that are really on a different track. We see a lot of the AP students, a lot of the higher end students do that, but STEM has to be beyond just that student. You know, there are occupations, we said half, even half of the half are for non-four-year degrees. So how are we going to fill that pipeline if we don't have the opportunities for those students? And we are currently running concurrent enrollment programs right now with career and technical education centers, with CTCs, where we're bringing those students onto our campuses and allowing them to take credit, allowing them to get exposure. So they have a Microsoft Office program, and those Office students, I said, what about, instead of saying, well, let's put them into an Excel or a PowerPoint at the college, they can get that at the CTC. How about digital forensics? Because cybersecurity is huge, is huge. So why not give them a different pathway? They may not want to do that. Maybe there are going to be business students, but at least they have another choice. They have an option, and they've received the training. So it's important that we reach down. And when we reach into the K-12, we're not just looking at that 17-year-old in a concurrent or dual enrollment situation. We're also looking at their 7 or 8-year-old sibling. So we have a number of STEM camps that we're running over the summer. We're adding some for the breaks. So it'll have a biotech boot camp that we're going to offer for the 8 to 12-year-old, because the parents are calling saying, hey, my son loves your program, but he's got a little sister or he's got a little brother. And so that's where, as Mary Ann said, we can start to break down that difference where it's not a special program just for girls. It's a program for young people, and this is a way for them to integrate. But I do think that there's a lot more work that we can do. Our goal, though, is just simply to be able to partner, particularly with K-12, as we do it.